What's up, everyone? Tyler Dunn here at Go Long on the road, Allen Park, Michigan,
Yeah.
with Justin Rogers, who obviously you know who Justin is because you subscribe to Detroit Football Network here on Substack. It has been awesome getting to know Justin over the years. We've known each other since
A
my
long
Milwaukee
time.
Journal Sentinel days. Yeah.
Yeah.
But when you told me you were thinking about launching a Substack, those conversations were phenomenal. I just loved hearing your excitement, the energy that you were gonna pour into this thing, and then to see it all come to fruition. Everybody out there, make sure you subscribe because Justin does one hell of a job covering these Detroit Lions. So it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
That's how you start an interview. You just blow smoke up somebody's ass. You set the tone
Yeah.
just like that,
It,
right?
it works with players, so why wouldn't it work with us?
But it's true. It's true. You do a hell of a job. And figured, hey, while we're out here working on some Lions stuff, which will roll out over the coming days, I suppose, at Go Long, we wanted to take stock of this squad. You know,
What's
we ate,
left of them?
yeah, what's left. We ate our loaf of molded bread. You know, we didn't have filet mignon before doing this podcast.
We give the bread to visitors.
That's what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was
I
very
had steak.
tasty. Damn it, I knew something was off there. All right, so is the season over? Are the Detroit Lions done? Are they cooked? Should we put a fork in them?
Yeah. Look, I think you can go all the way back to, I think it was week 6 where Aiden Hutchinson went down and broke his leg. And the defense, for as great as the turnaround of the Detroit Lions has been since 2021, the defense was a little slower to come around, right? And Aiden Hutchinson was taken off this year, and you're like, all right, this thing looks like it's coming together. It looks like a top 10, possibly even top 5 unit. You lose your best player. You lose a potential defensive player of the year, and you're like, oh, God, like, how does this thing fall apart now? And it didn't. And they kept losing another guy and another guy and another guy. And you're like waiting for it to be a breaking point. And it hasn't happened yet. And then last week at Buffalo, it did happen, or against Buffalo. And I don't know how realistic that representation is of the season, because that Buffalo offense is, I would say, historically good, right? I'm putting them in the classification of the greatest show on turf, of the Moss, Brady, Patriots, of some of the better Kansas City offense. Like, you look at their points per drive, their 30 points in 8 straight games, historically good. Teams aren't doing this. Josh Allen is playing at a freakish level. And so, yeah, the Lions got busted last week and they lost more. And I just need to see more, because they've overcome and overcome and overcome and overcome all season. And was that just a confluence of a lot of bad factors at once against a great opponent? Or is that representative of, yes, they have hit this straw that has broken the camel's back?
Yeah, I mean, Josh Allen's the league MVP for my money, and he's
I
been
agree.
unbelievable. So yeah, you could chalk it up as just a bad day at the office against an offense that is rolling. At the same time, man, they are patching this thing together week to week.
Yeah.
And to an extreme I don't think I've seen in years. We've got a lot of Packer fans who listen, obviously, and they're probably thinking back to 2010 when Green Bay won the Super Bowl. I mean, they had 16 on IR,
Well,
and Jermichael Finley and Ryan Grant at the top of that list, early Morgan Burnett. But I don't know. I mean, and you've written about this at Detroit Football Network. Everybody check it out. I don't know of a team that's been a contender, I should say,
yeah.
that's been decimated to this degree at this point of the season with so much ahead of them. That being said, you still have Jared Goff, who
Yep.
was an MVP candidate, probably
Yeah.
still should be. Still have a lot of weapons: Jameer Gibbs, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta. Like, you've got a core. The offense is going to be able to win shootouts
Yep.
if you can survive on defense some way,
Right.
somehow. My question at the top of the show is more rhetorical than everything, because I mean, I think if Dan Campbell's your coach, he's spent 4 years building this thing. We have the how built in front of us right here. I mean, only 3 players were even around before 2021. I mean, they have
Trying to see if I can
turned the
think of
roster.
really quick. So we had Decker, Ragnow, and Reeves Maben left and came back. Does he count?
Jack Fox,
Oh, the punter.
punter.
Punter always gets you.
What I'm saying is, like, I feel like what the coach has built, what the GM has built, what the pro department has built, and it kind of has to be this way if you're the Lions. It's bigger picture. It's cosmic. I don't want to use the word culture, but it's that.
But it
Like
is.
this,
It's
it is
absolutely
that where
is.
you can plug in David Long Jr. and Quan Alexander and Miles Adams and Allen Robinson and Tim Patrick. What they built over 4 years is big enough to withstand 22 on IR and still compete for the Super Bowl because Dan Campbell is a transcendent coach, the best coach in the sport.
Certainly the best motivator. And I mean, he does a lot of things really well, but like his S tier characteristic is motivation. And he's obviously had all the quotes this week, the moldy bread and the nobody writes our history, we have the pen. Like he just constantly just spilling out on these great quotes. But I look to the Green Bay game the week before Buffalo as a really good example because that's a very good offense as well.
Yeah.
It's not Buffalo, but it's a step below. It's in the B plus A minus tier of offenses, and I get they scored 30 points in that game, but it was around 300 yards of offense. It was 100 yards rushing, and that game was actually the worst for the Lions defense because they were missing Aleem McNeil, they were missing Josh Pascal, they were missing DJ Reader, they were missing all these guys for one game, and they go and they plug in Quan Alexander, Miles Adams, Jamal Adams, Jonah Williams,
Yeah.
four guys who they signed off of practice squads or in Jamal Adams' case off the street that week. All of them played, and I thought they played really well defensively that game. They had a few lapses, but like the lapses, if that's the worst problem you have, it's like okay. And so all those guys are here. They're getting a little bit more acclimated. The chemistry is building up a little bit. They are getting some guys back. Yes, they lost to Lee McNeil now for the season. That Carlton Davis blow is one of the worst they've had because rebuilding the secondary was so important to this team. Carlton Davis has easily been cornerback one for them, and kind of an underrated component of what he does is his contributions in the run game. I mean, he just sets such a hard edge on the perimeter and really helps out there, and that's how he got hurt.
He is a tough son of a bitch, man.
It's
In every conceivable way with the way he plays. You can see why Dan
broke his
Campbell
hand and
wanted
he's
him.
back out there in a week, and it's a really devastating blow for them. It was the big important thing. But I look at last year, this team was on the doorstep of the Super Bowl, and they should have been there. Some non-recreatable errors, I guess, happened in that game. A fumble by Jahmyr Gibbs down in territory. You have 2 drop passes by Josh Reynolds, who doesn't drop passes on fourth downs. You have those, and missed field goal. Like all these things are adding up.
Just skimmed past the football bouncing off of Kindle Vildor's head, right?
Yeah, well, and relevant now because very well may need Vildor to step in here for Davis. That's going to be really interesting how they patchwork their secondary now with they've got a lot of interesting options there. But if that defense could get you to the cusp of the Super Bowl, so can this one. I think it's a better unit. I think there's more chemistry. I think the secondary is playing at a much higher level, and even with the loss of Davis, it is better than what was happening last year. And so Jack Campbell's a year advanced in the scheme. He's playing very well. Alex Anzalone is going to be back for the playoffs. It's going to be huge. So your linebacker core is pretty solid. It's going to kind of come down to the trenches, and you still have some good pieces there. DJ Reader is still a really good piece. Zarius Smith was an excellent trade acquisition. Reminds me of what Minnesota did to replace Darisaw, right? You had to move quickly to replace an important piece. Lions were a little bit slower on the take in terms of replacing Aiden, but Smith had 19 pressures, I think, in his first 3 games. I had his worst performance last week against Buffalo. So did everybody else, but they have enough, I think, to be a middle of the road, top 20-ish defense. And you could be a top 20 if you've got a number 1, number 2, number 3 offense. You can still win games in this league. And so I think that, everything they want to accomplish is still in front of them. It's going to be a more difficult road, but I still think they could beat any team at the NFC, especially if they can get that number 1 seed and those games come to Ford Field.
They just played probably the 6 worst quarters that they played all season on defense, right? I mean, it's
certainly among them. First half in Houston's probably in that mix as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But before that, Aaron Glenn, I thought, was doing such a phenomenal job weathering these injuries, figuring out where the weaknesses were, compensating for it in different ways, creative ways, plugging whoever off the street
Yeah.
to keep this thing moving. So like the defense was substantially improved up to that point. So maybe with time, with all of these hours you have during the week to devise a game plan and figure out strengths of different players and put them in positions to be successful, you really only need you've got to play some defense in the playoffs. Don't get me wrong. As much as I love to complain about the rules and where the game is going and you know gambling apps being out of control, I mean this is what the NFL
You're
wants.
just yelling at all the clouds right now.
I've become the old man yelling
Okay.
at the cloud for sure.
Great.
Uh, you do need to play defense.
Mm-hmm.
You only really need to get with this off as good as this offense is playing, steal what 2 possessions in a game.
And
Maybe you force a punt or two, you get a turnover or two, and that's enough. That's really all you need defensively.
and they have turnover generators, right? Like they're in a little bit of a lull right now. Kirby Joseph is one of the best playmaking safeties in football.
Yeah.
He's got incredible range and hands to match. Brian Branch is a guy that sees the field, has incredible instincts, whether that's shooting a gap and tackling on the backfield, forcing a fumble that way. He's got pretty good instincts in the pass game as well. Maybe not as good at hands as Kirby Joseph, but can force turnovers. So you've got 2 really good safeties, and that's kind of the heart of what Aaron Glenn does. That he took that from Seattle, from New Orleans, the split safety, the value of how those guys work together. They do a ton of cover one, and Branch plays that robber role. And when you got a robber that plays with instincts, there's always opportunities to turn the ball over.
He was exceptional against the Bills, which is saying a lot for anybody.
Tackles, man.
Yeah.
I don't think he had more than 10 in a game before that.
You can put him anywhere. I just remember talking to Will Anderson
And they
Jr.
might this week.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, linebacker, safety, slot. I mean,
All of it.
put them all over the field. Will Anderson, college teammate of his at Alabama, just went out of his way at one point in our conversation before the season to say, we were talking about his Alabama days and Nick Saban being hard on guys. And he just said, like, Nick Saban ripped into Brian Branch more than anybody that he saw.
Interesting.
Just shred him. But the reason was he saw something special in him, right? Like, it's almost like back playing high school basketball. If your coach is riding your ass, it's probably a good
believe
thing.
in you.
Yeah, they see some talent there and they want to pull it out of you. At least that's what I told myself after some turnovers as a 10th grade point guard. But anyways, like,
have you ever talked to Brian Branch, by the way?
Briefly.
He might be the most polite human being on the planet. Like, everything is yes sir, no. It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Like so he has this budding reputation of league for these fines, these helmet to helmet hits. Like, in reality, he's just a guy that plays extremely hard and doesn't really have a mean bone in his body. It's just the switch flips when he's on the field.
Your point is spot on though, Justin. Like, you've got players like Brian Branch, shot out of cannon, a missile. He could force a turnover. Darius Smith, we've seen it out of him.
Sure.
DJ Reader, we've covered him at length. I mean, he's a boulder right in the middle of this defense. You can talk yourself into stealing those couple possessions and winning some games.
Yeah.
Now the question is, you got Chicago this weekend at Chicago.
It's going
1
great
o'clock
there.
at San Francisco. That might be a team just flailing
So
like a
here's the
dead
interesting
fish
thing
out of
about
water
that
at that
game
point.
too, by the way. What happened to the last team that the Lions felt like they had a vengeance mission? Dallas. They went in there and made Chris Christie very angry with how aggressive they were. Trick plays, offensive linemen hooking ladders, try to throw it.
that.
I mean, they went in there with a point to prove. Like, they were mad, and that one was more of an officiating decision. But they feel kind of the same way about San Francisco. They took away their Super Bowl opportunity, and yes, the Lions, the wounds were self-inflicted, but still that desire to show that they're better. And San Francisco's had their fair share of injury problems this year as well. I don't think that should be ignored, but like, they haven't held it together in the way that the Lions have. And I think the Lions are going to be on a mission to prove something. I think they're going to empty out the playbook for that game. And I think even if they got up 20 points, like, they are not taking the foot off the gas. Like,
and in Santa Clara, right? You're going back to the House of Horrors here.
Yeah. So I don't know. They might throw a pass to Vildor just to make him feel better. I have no idea. Just line him up with slot receiver.
I mean, it does feel like that is the old Yeller game. Like, you bring old Yeller back to pasture, put him out of his misery. Like, San Francisco's a mess.
Kind of unbelievable.
I know they've had injuries,
Yeah.
but Detroit doesn't want to hear it.
That's,
A lot of teams have injuries,
yeah.
and it's worse here than anywhere. So you beat Chicago, you beat San Francisco. If you're the Detroit Lions, you could be going into that finale against the Vikings. Would that be 14-2?
You would have the division locked up. The tiebreakers are in the Lions' favor. So even if both teams are 14-2, you'd have the division locked up. Probably the one seed is still in play though. So you're gonna
Right.
have to play that game. You have to give everything because you want, if it gets to that point, that NFC championship, you want it here. You don't want to go to Philly in the cold weather. This team is not afraid of cold weather. I think we saw that when they went to Green Bay. It wasn't cold, but it was windy and rainy, and they looked like the outdoor team that day. I think we're going to see this week, this Sunday against Chicago, that there's going to be an up down, right? There's going to be not a revenge factor, but a bounce back factor with this team, and they're going to show that they play outside just fine. But there's not many better home field advantages in the NFL right now than Detroit. Kansas City, Seattle, excellent as well. But I mean, Detroit is loving this upswing after 6 decades of garbage football.
Can you just elaborate on that, Justin? I mean, you've covered this team since what was the first season you covered the Lions?
2011. So there's actually kind of a good season there. I mean, that was where they, I think it was 12 years since they'd been to the playoffs. They went to the playoffs that year. They started 5-0, but that was the end of Javid Best's career right at the 5-0 point. Lost him to.
We were both at Lambeau for a Matt Flynn 6 touchdown game.
I was not there for that game. I was not fully on the road at that point, but was covering that one from home. That was crazy.
But you've seen it all.
I've seen a lot. Yeah.
So what is it really like here? I mean, what's it like with this team that's just laid dormant for decades, starving for a winner? And you've got one. You've got a team that was one of a dozen plays away from getting to the Super Bowl last year. How would you describe that palpability, like locally with the fans? I mean, you're seeing it at the Detroit Football Network. I can't imagine when you launched, for people who don't know, when Justin launched his site, I mean, it just detonated. You're giving me the updates on the subscribers as they're rolling in. It was amazing to me. That it speaks to the fan base, and how ravenous they are right now. So how do you see it? How do you feel it? What's it really like here locally?
So here's what we know: football is king. It is. You get the ratings of the top 50 programs in the United States in a calendar year, and it's 47 NFL games. I mean, it's just what it is, right? You might get the Grammys in there or the Oscars or a presidential debate, and that's 47 NFL games. Like maybe Michigan, Ohio State, that 50 slot. Like it's the king of American sports. Baseball, no longer America's pastime, it's football. On top of that, where do they love football more than anywhere else? It's the South and it's the Midwest. And these fan bases in the Midwest are just so loyal and dedicated. Green Bay, Buffalo, Cleveland, Detroit, Chicago, like they're just so diehard. And I go back to 2008. I was not covering the team at that point, but I was working in the industry, doing a lot more behind the scenes, data analytics. And in 2008, when the Lions were 0-16, the number one read topic on the biggest news site in Michigan was the Detroit Lions. Still, and that's what kind of was big confidence boost to why to launch, because I know that even if this team had a 5-12 year in the 17 game world, there would still be so much interest and engagement in this thing. But the fact that they're having success, the fact that people have waited so long, it's equivalent to the Cubs, and winning the World Series. These fans have been there. They haven't left. They still sold out the stadium most seasons. They still dominate the talk radio airwaves, even when they're bad. Like, that's what people want to talk about. Those people care about. They outdraw Michigan. They outdraw the Tigers. They outdraw both combined. And so when that is successful, the bandwagon, which, I mean, it's already full. The loyal fans are there. Now the bandwagon is just overflowing. You can go out to the grocery store now and the Lions gear, you see it. Like that was maybe something I don't think you saw a whole lot of maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. Certainly, probably people want to disavow the Lions a little bit during that era. It's everywhere. Like it's all people want to talk about. It's awesome, right? Like it's awesome when the biggest thing is also the best thing. And it feels like it's lifted up the entire city. It was really nice that this kind of coincided with coming out of COVID, which was such a downtime, depressing time for all of us. Like this was a big unifying factor. And what I say all the time that I find very fascinating about this team, you don't see linear progress in sports very much anymore. It's just the way sports is structured with free agency and the contracts and the draft. Like teams just cycle through players like crazy. In the NFL, what is it? Like if 35% of your roster flips over year to year, I think it's something like that, maybe more. And especially if you fire a coach, because coaches get way shorter leashes in this era, it's more, right? These Lions have been as linear a build as I've ever seen. And I grew up in this area, and my first real love of sports was the Bad Boys, the Detroit Pistons Bad Boys. That was a team that made the playoffs, got bounced, made the conference finals, got bounced, made the finals, got bounced, and then they get the finals and they get over the hump and they win two in a row. And it was with the largely the same core. Maybe they added a piece here and there to kind of fill the holes, but like that was such a rewarding experience as a young sports fan to watch this like slow linear build. And if you look at this roster, the Lions, like so many of the guys that are the key foundation now came in 2021 and 2022 and they've built through the draft. They traded for Jared Goff. They signed Alex Anzalone. They drafted Penei Sewell and Amon-Ra St. Brown, and they're giving these guys some contract. But even like the lower level roster guys, the Khalif Raymonds of the world, are guys that have just kind of been here through it all. And I feel like that allows a fan base to like the level of connection you have with that roster that you've watched grow and go through the 3-13-1 where you wonder if they're not going to win their first game, right? To starting 1-6 and going, oh shit, here we go again. Another rebuild failed, and the owner comes out and says, I believe in this process. We're close, and everybody's like, oh god, here's another Ford telling us that this is going to work out, and 9-7, right? And they win that last game of the season, even though it doesn't matter. And the hope is there. And you come into last year and you're like, this team better win the division. Mm-hmm. They better win. That the NFC North was down. You were on the upswing. Take care of business. And they did. They emphatically took care of business. And they got that first home game in Ford Field history. They won their first playoff game in 3 decades. And it didn't take a step back, like, right? That's the thing. And that's where you go back to Campbell, master motivator, right? Like he's finding ways to squeeze more juice from the orange. And he had him at 12-1. Obviously the last game was a bummer for everyone. And the attrition on defense is a bummer. And if that's what ends up costing them their Super Bowl is, but you look at this and you go, I'm not convinced it's going backwards. Like, I think that it's the hardest thing to do in football is sustainable success. We talked about this a little bit earlier today. The Packers and the Steelers and the Patriots before they had their downturn. Like having a 10-year stretch of just mostly success is so hard to do in this league, and that's been the goal here. And you feel like they legitimately have laid the foundation to have something like that.
Couldn't have said it any better than that. And it all starts with Dan Campbell.
No doubt.
It starts.
And Brad Holmes.
And Brad Holmes, right.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of the head coaches who preceded Dan, and there have been some fine head coaches.
Yeah.
Jim Schwartz had his little run, Jim Caldwell, Matt Patricia, not so much. But you think of their personalities, you think of the way, whether you're speaking at the podium, that's one thing, but also you talk to players as well. Just hearing the stories of Patricia. Brutal, obviously.
Brutal.
But I just feel like Dan Campbell's personality, he understood exactly what you're hitting on in terms of the locals being this sleeping giant, waiting for a team like this, waiting for a winner, knowing that the passion is there and it's just waiting to burst out in every conceivable way. You mentioned everybody reading about an 0-16 team. I mean, it's just been there for generations. I mean, we're going back to the 50s. It's wild to walk around this facility and you see the banners from championships from the 50s.
Yeah.
I mean, we're coming up on how many years is that? 80.
When they
80
put up
years.
we made the playoffs banner, it got rightfully mocked, and thankfully they pulled that down.
It's one thing for a coach to kind of talk about changing a culture, but when you actually mean it and it's authentic and you're speaking the same language as these fans, these locals, I don't know how it all translates to the field, but it does. It absolutely does.
I think they started to get it right with Jim Caldwell, and
very quiet though, right?
It's interesting
reserved.
because like he's so buttoned up in a lot of ways and so professional, maybe the most organized human being on the planet. I mean, just it felt like he had his year planned out to the minute. But the thing that Jim Caldwell did that should be recognized culturally is he made you feel like he cared about you.
Hmm.
And not just every player in the building, every person in this building. He knew their names, he knew things about their family, he was genuine and caring, and that resonates with players, right? Like you will play hard for a man like that that cares about you, that is trying to teach you and motivate you and help you get better in life and not just football. They took a big step back with Patricia. They went the wrong way with personality. They tried to go with the drill sergeant. Disaster. He treated everybody like Nick Saban treated Brian Branch, and you can't treat everybody like that. Lots of guys don't respond to that. You need to know how to treat each individual person in a single serving way that you know is how they learn and how they grow. Campbell comes in, he has that same genuine care for the individuals. He knows every person's name in this building, and I think you feel like you know him. He treats the media with respect. Not a lot of people do, and it doesn't matter how we do our job, but it's not a bad thing. Like he legitimately listens to our questions and wants to provide thoughtful answers, and so it makes the job better. Um, but on top of that, he has that wild side, that cowboy side, right? That
Hmm.
like just the energy he brings is it's like an evolved Pokemon version of Jim Caldwell, right? Like it's just a different level. And so now you've got this caring and compassionate and empathetic coach, but also like the classic television, like raring to go, get you pumped up, motivated. Um, and like that marriage has worked really well. And then you take Brett Holmes in this equation, you bring in a college evaluator, first general manager. The way you sustain success in this league is you draft and develop. He's drafted tremendously
Hmm.
well. Like it just doesn't get talked about enough. I mean, we talk about it, but like the hit rate he has had in throughout the draft, nobody hits 1,000%, right? He's hitting like 650 in terms of like a baseball,
Yeah.
batting average. It's unbelievable. He's Barry Bondsing the draft, and it's why this team is where it's at. It's why it feels
He knew
sustainable.
Jared Goff too. I
Is
mean,
these
he's there
two.
with the Rams. He knows there's something in there.
Well, not only that, like he was so important to them drafting.
Yeah.
They Les Snead came to Brad Holmes as he tells it, and he said, "Hey, if we thought about trading for the number one pick, what would you think about it?" And he goes, "I would do it for Jared Goff only." That's the story. Like Brad Holmes has always believed in Jared Goff, and I remember talking to him shortly after the trade. Holmes is new, and we asked the bridge questions, because that's what you thought. You thought it was a throw-in salary back for Stafford. You try it, maybe it works, and that's a bonus. But you're getting back 2 first-round picks.
Yeah.
You've got your own first-round picks. You're just expecting like almost like what the Falcons did this year, right? You take a shot at a veteran, you take a shot at a rookie, and you hope one of those lottery tickets pays off. They never had to take the shot at the rookie because while it was rough the first year with Goff, the Anthony Lynn hire didn't work out. It was a bad marriage. It happens. Dan Campbell did what great leaders do, and you don't persist in a mistake. You move on. That offense was garbage. I mean, they tore it down to the studs and just couldn't put enough talent on the field. Good offensive line, not much else. But you got Amon-Ra in there, and you give him a second half of a rookie season to develop, and you're like, oh shit, we found a gem, like better than a gem. We found
Yeah.
a 2 carat diamond, and you start building around him. You add Jamison Williams, you add Sam Laporta, you bolster the offensive line. You go out and you say, screw conventional draft trends. We're going to draft Jahmyr Gibbs, number 12 overall, and people all over national media criticized him for it. I get it. There's a reason, there's positional value and all that, but Jahmyr Gibbs has been the Alvin Kamara light that they thought he would be. If you're doing the Saints, you've got Mark Ingram and Alvin Kamara,
Yeah.
and you probably have a better version of Mark Ingram and a little bit lesser version of Alvin Kamara, but combined, it's the same impact. And so, you talk about all these defensive players down, right? But this offense is extremely unique. The offensive line hasn't been as good as we thought it would be, but it's still good. But they have speed and space.
Mhm.
and they have the ability to bully you a little bit as well. They'll block you with their tight ends and their receivers. They'll punch you in the mouth, and they'll do the 3 yards in a cloud of dust. And so you kind of have to prepare for it all. It's gonna be a little tougher if Dave Montgomery can't come back, and that's very, very likely that he's done for the year. Um, but they'll patchwork that. They've got some other running backs in there, and it's still going to be a very tough offense for almost every defense in this league to stop.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah,
And it's going to be fun for everybody here. And we should
better than
probably,
top 10 draft pick. Interesting.
yeah, I was going to say,
Done that enough.
you're probably so used to, speaking of those mock drafters who were very unhappy with the Gibbs selection.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that
I was a Bijan guy, which, by the way, wasn't a bad take, but
how dare you? How dare you enjoy a running back in the first round?
Yeah.
I'm all for any team that can just take a match to the mock drafts because they start now. I mean, really, it's got to be enjoyable to cover a team day to day that's competing for a Super Bowl versus thinking about those flights to Mobile for the Senior Bowl and who the team may draft.
I will say
concocting.
It's not just taking a match to mock drafts. It's taking a match to conventional wisdom. We hear it all the time, copycat league, right? Somebody's got to set the bar to copy. And I feel like for once, instead of following and being late on a trend, the Lions are kind of setting the trend, right? With a coach that's a motivator first and foremost, and a bunch of former players on his staff that kind of follow in his lead to draft a running back. The running back has had a massive resurgence. I'm not saying the Lions started that, but there's a reason, Derrick Henry's fitting in so great, and the Eagles are flourishing by adding Saquon and taking them to another level, that Josh Jacobs is a step up from Aaron Jones, who was a very good running back. Teams are committing to this because they realize that you still kind of can set an offensive tone by running the football, and I think that's cool.
I was going to pull up the quote here, but it will take me forever. I think it's even bigger than that. I mean, Graham Glasgow, we were talking about this back in September, I want to say. And he really believed that, I'm sure you go to him a ton.
Graham's the best.
He's an intellectual guy that will kick your ass. It's a great combination.
You never know where that conversation is going to go.
He thinks it through, which is appreciated, right? It's not just an obligation. Oh shit, who's coming up to my locker to bother me today? Yeah. And he said, he believed that the game was really getting back to those mano-a-mano roots. Me versus you, who wins, physicality.
That's the Dan Campbell message all the way.
He said, look, I think we're moving past that era of out-scheming, out-tricking, out-smarting. He brought up Sean McVay Rams, that offense. Now, they're still really good, but they've had to evolve. And just being able to, on a whiteboard, figure out with those X's and O's, how you can out-scheme somebody. He's like, look, everybody kind of knows everything. And when we go out there, we're just looking for those one-on-one matchups, whether it's on the line, whether it's a receiver, whatever it is, and we're going to win that. We're going to out-bully you, out-muscle you, win just old-school football. And it has gotten back to old-school football this year.
I think to a recent story, the little Jahmyr Gibbs posting some of the cadences or partial play calls on the board, and Dan Campbell was annoyed by people making a big deal. And he said, look, you can have our whole damn playbook. Stop us. And it's like, how do you not love this guy as a fan, right? Like that, and that leans into that, right? Like, go ahead and beat us one-on-one. And the Bills did. And kudos to them. They beat them on both sides of the ball. And, but Campbell's turning that into motivation, right? Sometimes you got to be punched in the face to remind you what,
It's being concerned about the right things, though. Think about Matt Patricia or so many coaches with that team, with a player. For those who don't know, Jahmyr Gibbs, it was on Instagram, right? He's taking a picture in a meeting, and you see all the signals on the board. How many coaches just lose their shit and pull that player into the principal's office and admonish him? Maybe they rip him in front of a whole meeting.
I had a reader who made, I think, the perfect joke. He said, if Matt Patricia would have seen that photo, he would have traded Jahmyr Gibbs for Lawrence Maroney. And it's like, it just hits all the notes. So I don't remember who said it, but good job. He made me laugh.
It's being worried about the right things.
Yeah.
Dan Campbell gets it.
And it's a young player. Like, you're not just a coach, you're a teacher, right? And so that involves teaching lessons. And you can do that in a punitive way, or you can do it in a way that helps a guy grow. And I wasn't there in the room, but I'm sure Dan pulled him aside. He goes, look, this isn't helpful to
Yeah.
us. You just have to think better. Don't do it again. And Jameer was probably like, you're right. Okay. On to the next thing. And that's the way it should be. Whereas, yeah, there are coaches that would berate the player, suspend them a quarter, make them pay fines or do laps. Like, just why? What like, again, it goes back to a healthy culture. And the culture, I don't know if it could be much healthier than it is here. Guys love playing here. They love playing here. They love playing for not just Dan, but for Aaron Glenn and Kelvin Shepard and Hank Fraley. Like, this coaching staff is beloved. And when they get a coach where the players don't connect with them like that, there's a few guys that have been gone after a year, and there's a reason.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they bring him in, it doesn't work, and you're out. And then Terrell Williams is in, and guess what? Beloved, beloved. And so that's kind of, part of why it works here.
And to give that context, I think he has evolved since then. Brian Flores, this would have been 2021. I flew to Miami, spent some time with Lynn Bowden Jr. Suffice to say, Lynn Bowden Jr. did not light the NFL on fire.
Yeah.
But it was an incredible conversation. This guy was so interesting. And it was a positive story, not only on him, but really Brian Flores and the Dolphins and how they were going to use him after the Raiders had treated him terribly. And he had detail from that experience with Mike Mayock and John Gruden and that staff. Anyways, yeah, I mean, he had a lot of positive things to say about Brian Flores. Story comes out. A lot of people read it at Go Long. I think it's still one of our most read stories. But I had heard through some very reliable sources that in front of the whole team, again, positive story, nice things said about the head coach. Yeah. Brian Flores puts up my article in front of the whole team and just admonishes Lynn Bowden Jr., like tears him apart, and tries to use that as an example of what you don't do.
Yeah.
And there's Jahmyr Gibbs taking a picture, signals all over the place, and Dan Campbell just brushes it off, handles it privately his own way. But he ain't doing that. It's nothing close to that.
Crazy. Like, Bill Belichick's probably the greatest coach in NFL history, right? There's a reason his tree is rootless and it doesn't have branches, right? Like, they not universally fail, but they've largely failed. And it's because what's worked for Bill Belichick just doesn't work anymore. It doesn't. And that's fine. He did it great. He found the right quarterback that meshed with his personality. They built a dynasty. It was wonderful. But McDaniels leaves, disaster. Patricia leaves, disaster. Some of the other branches that have left, it's been disaster. It's actually
Charlie Weiss, go way back. Romeo Crennel.
Yeah. I don't know if
Joe Judge.
We count Saban. I mean, Saban pulled the Belichick act off really well in college. Maybe it's a little bit different, but
and maybe Flores has evolved. I mean, everything I hear is that he has.
Yeah,
yes.
Like I remember talking to Flores at a Super Bowl once. Just media night where, he's I think he was a position coach because it was a Patricia story I was trying to write at that point, and he was a delight to talk to and had an intensity about him. He was thoughtful with his answers, and I thought, this guy's going to be a great head coach someday. And obviously the whole Miami situation, top to bottom, sounds like it was a disaster, but Minnesota players seem to really love him.
Oh, yeah. Harrison
Smith. Defense is awesome. I love the way they play defense.
I mean, Blake Cashman, Harrison Smith, various Viking players we've talked to, they said, came in and was here and had heard the stories about Brian Flores in Miami. I mean, players talk to each other, but they had an open mind. And you go through something like that so publicly like he did. I mean, Tua Tagovailoa's doing interviews saying that his own head coach is telling him that he sucks. It's going to have an effect, and you can either grow from it or dig in. I think he has genuinely grown, and
it's here we are. Interesting contrast to O'Connell too, right?
It is, and I think
O'Connell's got that love you up coach like Campbell, right?
But they needed that mix. I mean, Ed Donatel before him. I mean, they'd have a bad game, they'd give up 30, 40 points, and Harrison Phillips said, in the film room, we're not really correcting what needs to be corrected. We're just kind of letting things go under the rug. Flores is not going to let that stuff slide. You do need hard coaching. You need it. You need that old school principle.
Yeah.
But it's got to be done.
And that's what they talk about with AG,
with the modern athlete,
right? He was one of a handful of coaches, and he was the number one ranked coach on the NFLPA's poll. Number one, assistant coach in terms of like, are you happy playing for this guy? Do you love playing for this guy? And you talk in that locker room, like the guys love him, and he strikes that balance, right? He coaches them hard. He's demanding, but knows when to love a guy up, right? And to elevate him as opposed to constantly berating him and embarrassing him in a team setting, and then ultimately saying, I can't coach this guy. And the Patricia era trades Quandre Diggs, who goes on and has a wonderful several seasons in Seattle. They trade Darius Slay, who's a borderline Hall of Fame talent, who's had some great seasons in Philadelphia. Like, you don't give up on talent like that. And it's because you couldn't handle crafting a coaching strategy to individuals that didn't fit your coaching style. And I think the only thing that this team demands is you give maximum effort.
Mm-hmm.
They don't rip your personality away from you. And in fact, it's in some ways it's encouraged, right? Like, these guys are able to tell their stories. They're able to talk about light topics outside of football, and they're able to talk about serious things within football. There's always a line where you don't give away too much behind the scenes. You don't throw a teammate under the bus. You don't share the scheme or the game plan. But like, ultimately, these guys aren't chewed out behind the scenes. They're not putting your stories up on the board and saying,
right,
don't ever do this. They're not telling these guys they suck, right? They might say, that play sucked, or your effort sucked on this play. Do it better. But that's what you talk about here, the standard, right? The standard is effort, right? Give your best all the time. And that translates to any industry, not just football.
Everyone, read Justin Rogers, Detroit Football Network, at Substack. What is the URL? People wanted to go right to the URL.
DetroitFootball.net.
.net. There
Those
it is.
.coms are just not available anymore. And if they are, they're just too damn expensive.
Well, but also, and that's why Substack is great too. I mean, Justin's always putting new chat threads up throughout the week. Make sure you turn those notifications on so you can jump into a conversation. He's got a podcast, feature stories, film review. There must be 5 of you mutated throughout this building, providing all of this coverage. But hey, it's been great to see you grow. Thanks so much for carving out all this time to enlighten us all a little bit more on these Detroit Lions.
Man. Anytime.
See y'all soon.